Hello, testing, testing. Hopefully this is all up and running. Always terrible at navigating to our YouTube stream, so I can actually see chat over there. All right, boom. What's up, everyone? I see. It's a little weird. I don't know why my browser is not fully covering the screen, but it's gonna bother me. Hopefully that picks up. Boom. What's up, everyone? I have so much aura. Thank you. Let's give some people some time to load in. I don't have anything extreme on the docket. I think this is still my list that's up and about. See if this changes at all from where it was last time. Now that we kind of have our complete format here, I think we can give some objective numbers. That was kind of going to be our thing to start, general Q&A as well, and then go over our objective numbers that we have here based on theoretical win rates and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, pub stomp a local skirmish with Victor. Well, depends upon what you're playing into, I suppose. If you're playing into a bunch of Yi and apparently Aurelia and Kaisa, you're gonna have a rough time. Vex apparently a bad one. Interesting. So I'm not clicking on that tab. Let's see. Alright, let's see. Hartford Best of Decks. Surely it's published by now. Is this where they actually ended up posting my set photo? Oh, yeah. Nice. So what the Best of Victor's on. Well, ranking number 30. Pretty good. At this event, or no, it was at Utrecht, I played against the guy who was Chakram Dancer maxing. All this stuff makes sense though. Because this looks pretty good. I don't know that I would change anything from it. Maybe the one of Eclipse is a little questionable, and the one of a Chakram Dancer, one of Salvage. This could be whatever. One Singularity, it's probably fine. Everything else here is a pretty good list though. Eastern K regions, Azir, Victor, and Diana with a sprinkle of LeBlanc and Aurelia. Let's take a look and see. Just looking for good win rates in the Azir, Victor, and Diana. based on our current information. Victor. Looks like your best option is going to be Master Yi, at least based on win rates. I don't know if anything else comes close. Looks really as a losing matchup in Diana. Interesting now. It's a little bit surprising. I don't think that matchup's particularly changed much. Oh, I guess Diana was always a little favored into it. Diana into Aurelia. The exception of Sydney, but who knows what happened in Sydney. Hey, what's up, Dubs? I know it's pretty early over in Australia, so thanks for taking the time to come in. One of my RR top 8 games, you didn't use Arena Bar to buff set before charming the guy. Do you remember the reason behind it, or just hangover? Yeah, I just kind of forgot about... Well, there was a real reason to it where I didn't necessarily want to buff it ahead of time, but I just, like, miscounted the dude's energy. I forgot that Diana tapped for a mana at the time, so yeah, that was a definite mistake. I didn't know if it would have mattered necessarily, but definitely gave the option to make a play that I didn't expect. But yeah, he just like tapped the Diana, and I was like, oh wait, I forgot that does that. When we can expect the set guide update. I'm gonna try and get it out before I go to the PPG this weekend, which I've unfortunately been conscripted to go to, for better or worse. So yeah. Other hobbies outside of Riftbound? I game with friends occasionally. Go to the gym every day. Outside of that, not really. Does One Piece count? Even though it's just another card game I'm looking to make some money off of. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a hobby. There wasn't many boarding losses in Sydney. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think the Diana changes to go on the losses plan is probably warranted. I mean, it's really only, it's not even dead into Yi because you can hit their Zanyas. And it prevents them from doing like Triforce shenanigans too, so. Thanks for the sub, Nelfi. What am I playing at the PPG? I will just be playing set again. I don't really see a reason to play anything else. What's the RQ meals? Do I sugar max for? I just see whatever the hotel breakfast is usually. So my big thing is, since I'm trying to get back in shape, is make sure I have at least like usually 30 to 40 grams of protein is my goal. And then past that, just whatever works for me. I'm pretty simple. I pretty much always play Fiora instead of Set first whenever it comes to your turn 2 play. I do have some VODs. I recorded all my games from the events, so the Runes and Rifts, so there's a chance that we end up going through some of those. I don't know how many of them are interesting, but I figured that might be something good to go over as we get people in here. But the main thing I wanted to do, now that I'm giving people some time, is to just kind of give like a full format recap, especially as we're going into the PPG and otherwise, because it's kind of weird with how the pricing is structured, that technically it's a lot higher. It's a lot higher EV to play whatever you think the best deck is in these events, being the PPGs, than is the main event, because they actually have the same amount of cash pricing. The only difference is the best ofs are regular medals now instead of actual best of medals, right? So, yeah, that's because of that. Like, you know, the best of, or the regular medals are basically worth like 1/10 of what the best ofs are for the most part, kind of across the board. So you're losing out on a lot of value in that retrospect, but the cash pricing is actually identical. So, you know, if you think you can perform well at a PPG or otherwise the Pittsburgh event or the CCS, CCS especially, because I think this first one they won't have medals for, but the rest of them they will. That's what I've been told, I believe. So, yeah. Going through that, I think the undisputed GOAT of set 2, just kind of across the board, obviously has to be our boy Master Yi. I don't think that's changed at all. Aurelia is still, I guess it didn't do particularly great at Hartford and has a rough Yi and Diana matchup, so I don't think, while she's still up here, I don't think that I can put her at second. Let's see, based on win percentage, Azir actually has some pretty rough matchups. I'm surprised that it didn't perform well into Victor. Apparently has a rough Yi matchup, LeBlanc matchup. I know I'm biased against Azir because that seems to be like the one deck that I always lose to. But overall, its win rates are like kind of 50-50 across the board. It seems like nothing outlier. That's why I always put Azir a little bit higher because I hate this deck so much. It's just too efficient, but realistically, it's probably like down here. Ever using Showstopper just to get a buff on set or your carry? Yeah, all the time. I mean, it's Showstopper should be used in the deck, just kind of as an accelerator, right? Where you're getting in there an extra turn ahead. Sometimes it's a benefit, sometimes it's a detriment. So you always have to be a little bit cognizant of that to make sure you don't overexert yourself with the list. But yeah, we got auctions on the board, so this is probably the list I'll submit. Going into the Runes and Rift, I changed one card, which was adding the third Lucian out of the board, just because I wanted access to as many of these going second as possible. I don't even know if I ended up drawing it on any of the games, to be completely honest, but it does just feel so much easier on the games where you actually have access to illusions. It made the numbers a little bit weird when I was trying to take stuff out. Was my only regret with this, but yeah, obviously Ash is only in the sideboard for Aurora decks, so if you're not expecting to play against Aurora, then that can always just be cut. What's the funniest Riot ID I've played against? I don't know if there's been any that I can even remember, to be honest. It's not something I check too often. I feel like there have been some funny ones, but none that I remember. Does Lucian have a positive percentage against Aurelia? Let's see. It's just low sample size. I mean, it maybe isn't a bad matchup, but just because they can combo you and Aurelia doesn't have too many answers, I guess the biggest thing if the Aurelia deck doesn't ride the Adaptatron, then it's gonna be rough for them, right? But you know, we can see in Utrecht it had the same thing just reversed as losing into Aurelia. Obviously losing to Diana as well. Then if we go back to here, Lucian had, again, 38% win rate. And then into Sydney, Lucian had, I guess, a winning rate in Sydney. But again, these are really low sample sizes at the end of the day. Like, you can also click on it and see what specifically happened here. So we have, yeah, a lot of these are all done at pretty lower brackets. So it's not like we had the best Aurelia players in any of these. Right, so step up. So I'm putting a set to the wayside in set 4. Yep, there's not really much of a reason for me to continue playing set, right? So, yeah. Unfortunately, at least as of right now, if there's some reason to bring set back out, then I will. I do know Riot that wants to doesn't like the idea of Legends rotating, so otherwise they would have just rotated stuff out early, right? So I would love to play some more set, but without the best of pricing, and that was kind of what I was going to talk about, is like at these PPG events, they do technically have, and these 25Ks, they technically do have best of pricing, but there's even a world in which I would play a different deck than set at the Showdown series, even though I can get the guaranteed medal set, just because like the cash pricing is worth a lot more in theory, anyways. Let's see. Do you think we're close to solid meta in the set at all, or do you think they're going to go? No, as far as I can tell, things have been more or less solved, right? Like at least of the top decks here, we aren't seeing anything super outlandish. Obviously, we had some crazy outliers like the 6% win rate with EPG at Utrecht, and I believe I didn't even have the Vancouver specifically at Utrecht that I was able to get to a 60% win rate, which is astronomical number. That's crazy. Um, but yeah, I think it's the numbers kind of don't lie at this point. We have some top decks here being Master Yi and Aurelia and Diana. I think really are unquestionably the best three decks, right? After that, Sivir and Azir come back in. I would put LeBlanc higher just because it has had some pretty decent. Well, I guess it only kind of popped off at this most recent event. But yeah, there's clearly like a difference when it comes to the win rate of the LeBlanc deck, and I think LeBlanc will always be like a solid A tier deck. Um, just given its win rates across the board, but yeah. So have I seen Vera's XPE cook? I have not, but I know that he started out 6-0 at the RQ and was able to day two. So proud of him on that one. But yeah. I don't think that there's too much to be explored out there. Like the most interesting thing that we had was the Luxes come out of nowhere. Um, but even then, like the win rate for Lux is just not ideal across some of the top decks. So it's just one of those decks that when played well, I think you have a bunch of kind of 100-0 matchups that they just can't do anything against you, right? So, oops. Um, let's see. Is this not Trevor's tag? I was gonna look at his matchup spread, but yeah, it's. I mean, I think Yi is kind of probably the best deck here. We see that like going into the day two, at Harvard at least had a pretty low play rate. But again, I think a lot of this comes down to the players piloting it for better or worse. I think Riftbound is currently in a state where it's very, very lopsided towards the top players and playing perfectly. So I think part of what makes I forget the I. So Trevor's matchups. Yeah, so he ended up only really losing to these Diana decks was... How did this work out? Because he ended up x2... That can't be right. It's not x2-1, right? It was... I thought it was x1-1. Weird. Anyways, clearly Diana is a problem matchup for the Lux deck. I think it's able to apply enough pressure, especially these versions were a lot more aggressive, and then being backed up with Hard Bargain and Abandon are some of the best cards into it. But he was able to actually take out a lot of the Aurelia decks through like Double Defy, because typically they don't have Hard Bargain or Abandon. I think Aurelia would be the worst matchup for this deck if built in the way to counter the Lux deck, but typically they aren't. Was able to beat up on Alan, so. All these docs are available in our Discord, which you can access through our Metafire. The more I've played versus Purple Vex, the more I've moved away from being super OP. Definitely feel bad for Lilia players, though. Yeah, I mean, the issue when you have cards like this Purple Vex, right, is that it's just such a universally powerful card that it's going to see play in any deck that can play it, just because, you know, a 4/4 with deflect is already pretty good, and then just being able to get rid of a lot of the bullshit that exists when it comes to like Vise and Rangars out of pretty much every deck, as well as just stopping any movement shenanigans out of Aurelia. This card's just kind of going to be universally played for a long time, so obviously a lot of our top meta makes it look not as good, but there's just so many situations where this card like just prevents you from getting blown out. If your opponent's you're playing into like a Diana and you're able to clear their board, you can actually tap out and not have to fear some sort of weird like Quay plus Ride the Wind, since it can't move at all anyways, right? So this card's just a little too good, I think, in my opinion. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know why. You think LeBlanc has more room to grow in the coming sets, or is LeBlanc the theoretical ceiling for the deck? As time goes on, it's possible that other variations will exist for LeBlanc. The primary reason why we haven't been able to play the aggressive version, in my opinion, is primarily Gus. While this card is seeing kind of universal play out of purple decks, it's really difficult to be too aggressive. Obviously, they can always Gus the token anyways, even out of the hook versions. But if you're trying to be extremely aggro and you just get gusted, you go from scoring 2 points in a turn to 0, then like it's just never really going to work out for you, right? So, and then Starcross is always going to be kind of a beating as well. So I think LeBlanc's specific issue is it's really just into the Diana matchup, right? I mean, even if we look across the board, LeBlanc's actually the only deck that has a winning win rate into Yi Proving Grounds in every single event, I think. Maybe Silver does as well. Let's see, this is day 2. Let's see, I guess Misfortune. So basically you're on like an Aurora deck or you're on LeBlanc. Yeah, because Silver has a good matchup into Yi, and then LeBlanc actually has the highest win rate into Yi Proving Grounds, right? So anytime a deck has like a pretty decent win rate into everything, with a couple of exceptions, and then just is the highest win rate into the best deck, you always have to consider it. But I personally think that's specifically because of the hook variation. I just don't think that other variations of LeBlanc really do what you're looking for. Like, from my understanding, you could maybe make the Diana matchup work if you're like playing singularities. Then you're losing out on the ability to play hook, and then you're gonna, without hook, you're like probably losing on the matchup, the Aurelia matchup. All these other matchups are really gonna struggle without it. So, yeah, I think that it'll be the variation for a while. Technically, you could play the Lux Infinite and LeBlanc too, so that's another option, I suppose, if you really wanted to. Just since that deck wants to filter through its entire deck anyways, you could maybe make some sort of variation that works in that way. But yeah, that's really it. Top 8 game 1. Spent at 3 cards tonight and cast hard bargain and stop the combo. They drew the second ride, the win to play away. Double ride, yeah. I remember Trevor telling me it was very unfortunate how he ended up losing in top 8, because otherwise I think that was potentially his event to win, so. It's just nothing you can do about it sometimes. It's a deck that is very low on interaction, so it doesn't necessarily really have outplay potential, right? It's just do your combo and hope that it works. Do I think PGE will still see play and step forward no best of? Yes. I do think people will continue to play PGE for as long as it is as dominant as it currently is, right? There are a lot of people that are still chasing their invites, and hopefully we'll get announcing as to what the regional pricing is, but at least the regionals that were over in China had pretty cool pricing when it came to a lot of stuff, including like the ring and stuff like that. But I know at least I personally would love something like that to be able to show off. So, do you think a non-Aurora Serverless has any legs? I would say no. Just kind of in general, if I had to guess. Right now, there's just no reason to play this color combination and not play Aurora unless you're playing Kha'Zix, right? Like, if you want to do that, why not just play Kha'Zix? You have access to a better chosen champion. You've got... I think these matchups are a little skewed from Hartford. I know that Kha'Zix had a much higher win rate. You know, you can see into E and Diana in Utrecht. And even Vancouver. Kha'Zix actually ended up having a decent win rate across the board. So I think Kha'Zix is just a better version of any sort of non-Aurora Sever deck, right? At least in my personal opinion. Vex is really matchup twinning, breaks some decks hard, but it's really underwhelming in other matchups. You're talking about the deck or the card? So deck actually, at least from Hartford, had a pretty solid win rate across the board. This has been one that I'm always a little bit surprised to see, because there's some events where the Vex deck has like a much lower win rate, and then some where it has a pretty good win rate. I wonder how many of these are just like the Vex decks are on fire and winning their die rolls, as opposed to not winning their die rolls. Because again, at the end of the day, whenever I'm looking at these numbers, this is more data just to give us some idea of where the format's at right now. But these numbers are so small sample size wise that, you know, any number of these things could be an outlier. Even when we like combine the data across all these events, yeah, the sample size is just so low. It's really hard to say for sure. You know, like the Vex decks aren't drastically changing, but we're going from having a 50% win rate into Aurelia, into a 28% win rate into Aurelia, into now back up to a 43, into now a 60% win rate into Aurelia, just because of small sample size. So, but yeah, you gotta take all this with a grain of salt. But I do think that the story gets told to some degree to let us know like what some of these top decks are, you know. And there's obviously some information that we can glean for this. Pike had a 13% win rate in the Master U Proving Grounds in Hartford, so you know I probably don't need to look at other things to say that matchup's probably pretty bad, right? Same with like Azir and Victor. I can also extrapolate because I know what all these decks do and understand like when I see these numbers why these numbers are what's the case, right? I've tested and played all of these matchups at one point or another, so. The newer versions of Vex trying to run more copies of early. Let's see what the Vex. Actually, know what Vex is. Oops. Yeah, so on 2, Apathetic, 3, Cheerless. Crazy. 3 and 3 out of the board. There we go. Gloomist. So the best of Vex was only... It didn't even make top 64. It's crazy. This goes on Aria Lurings, Allays. Yeah, there's no No Aurelia's, at least in this specific version. This is just like traditional hold Vex. I don't know that I agree with Ari as a card, but clearly it at least did well enough for, I think this is 10-3 record with really bad breaks. So, but, you can always see what his matchups were. So, yeah, 10-3 total. Wow. I'm surprised around 3, 5, and I guess 3, 5, and 9 is pretty early losses. But even this, he lost to a guy that ended up 10-2-1 here. I guess his breakers were just cooked by losing this guy. Went 1-2-1, 3-4, 4-3, 5-3. Yeah, not having a single person. That we're only having one person that you beat make day two kind of cooks the breakers, and then obviously not having the round one buy is also pretty tough. So he lost to two Yees and a Sivir. He was able to beat. It's like a bunch of jungle, actually. Only beating one Diana, a Diana that didn't even make day two, so. And then playing against zero Aurelias as well, which was apparently one of the harder matchups for this deck. So. I think the Vex deck is okay. Um, we kind of have it here in this like A to B tier, which I kind of agree with. I think it's honestly everything here is pretty accurate. I think this is the tier list that we posted before, and at least in terms of the top decks, I think that this is pretty accurate from what I'm seeing. Once you see representation of the legends during the set for regional, if people are stuck on set and stuff. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure when we'll hear more as to how everything's going to end up working now that we have the quote unquote rotated legends and stuff, but I hope we'll get some good info on that. See what ends up coming of it. Yeah, I know what the Aries are in there for. There's like a few ways that you can facilitate that. I think the issue with the Ari is it leaves such a like a easy target, I suppose, that you now have to protect in order to make things work. And like I think my issue with Vex as a whole is that they can kind of chip away at your board typically. The only tanks that you have are the cat. Right? So nothing else in here actually has tank with the exception of your mousers. So as soon as they're able to get rid of that, then they can start just kind of like chipping away at your board. But he's on Boots of Swiftness as well as another way to gank over. I think Boots is like my favorite way to win with this deck because you can eventually just like get to the point where you keep cycling the boots onto all your units and gank everything across. So I think this is definitely one of the better cards out of the deck. But yeah, this deck always ends up just looking like a complete pile of cards. Like what even is all this stuff? It's got so much random nonsense in these decks to make things work. Notably, only one Emperor's Divide out of the board. This is another card that I've seen out of this deck to potentially win as like another Boots of Swiftness-esque kind of effect. But, this deck wants to play so many different things that it's really difficult to find room for everything, for all your gusts, all your charms, existential dreads, Starcross, etc., etc. Where even a lot of those, like, the most powerful cards just aren't maxing. So... let's see. I don't know if we had a China event in a little while. Currently, I don't even know when the next China event is, but um, yeah, I guess we've just seen some Beijing challenges and such. But even here, I haven't really seen. I guess we have a ninth place Fiora hook list, but I mean, when they're playing like two hooks, I think it's questionable as if I can even really call these lists hook lists. Obviously, we're trying to abuse like Return of the Dragon and such, but can you see the Diana players matchups? Sure. It was Let me see what our top 8 was, actually. Does this have our top 8? This is so funny. They gave the Rumble guy #X and even give him an overall ranking. Oops. Hmm. Miss it. So, oh, interesting. There was. Okay, so I guess it was the Insanity, and only 2 of them ended up making top. That's right. Just copy and paste these so that I have them. I don't know why this spreadsheet bugged out and thinks that 13, 2, and 1 is 31 points, but it doesn't actually matter. So let's take a look at some of these Diana lists and we can see, oops, see what we got here. So, oh, interesting. So this might be out of order. Oh, I think this is how it ends up doing, where it's like kind of bugged and it's showing this twice. That makes sense. So I know that Ezreal is a pretty terrible matchup for Diana. Just because the Ezreal deck can kind of just kill everything that you have. Let's see, he was able to beat Prismat too. I mean, beating Trevor, Prismat, having to play into Bradykin. Let's see, he beat the best of Misfortune. Oh yeah, he ended up. I remember he drew with 5 up, which is really sad to see. I was rooting for him. He started out so strong and then just had a really, really bad day too. Maybe Akaido on Diana. Oh, and then he actually ended up winning in the mirror match, apparently. Oh, this was in top 8. Top 4? Maybe top 4. So, looking at this, I'm going to assume Ben had a much harder bracket. And, oh, actually, Linsanity's day 2 was kind of nuts. Having to play into an Ezreal, play into Duval. Losing to the 3rd best Diana is kind of tough. Then, let's see, beating an Azir. I think they were both pretty comparable. Both of them had their own demons that they had to deal with. So, I think both lists are pretty solid if you're just looking for a Diana list to copy. Why is Pike losing for Yi? It shouldn't be. From what I remember. Yeah. And Hartford, Pike, day 2 was 0% into Yi. So, it is not, is the answer. The sheets only in our is one of our benefits for our Meta5 for Discord for the people that are asking. Carving software data is pretty balanced. IMO, yeah. Best of Teemo list. I'll take a look for you. That's a jinx. Let's see. Evelyn, Dread, Guerrilla Warfares. Okay, yeah, we're just doing the Nocturne Teemo strategist stuff. Yeah. That's what I've been told is like the best way to play this deck is just as a very aggressive hidden deck, and I think this list is solid. I can take a look and see what his matchup spread looks like, but I think if I were to play Teemo, this is probably what I would recommend people to play, which it's not a bad one either, just given that it actually has, um, it's one of the more expensive metals. So, we're saying. So, let's see. So he ended up losing to Sam Sherman, which I'm a little surprised by that. I assume that's a good matchup for him. Beating a couple of Lilias, beating a Diana, unintentionally drawing with an Aurelia in round 9, which I think works out because they were 9-3-1 to get our best of. Then, yeah, losing to 2 Dianas in the end makes sense to me. I would assume that matchup's pretty rough. How is this? I guess 9-2-1 got paired into 9-1-2. Okay. Weird. Yeah, I think this list is fine. Didn't play in any Master Yis, which I don't know how that matchup would be, to be honest. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe it's fine. Is Yi known to have a lot of card draw? The thing about the Yi deck is that it doesn't have like insane amounts of card draw, but it has just enough. At the end of the day, one thing that you have to remember about any card game in general is the card draw only really matters in the sense that you need things to play. But if I am able to kill my opponent, it doesn't matter if I have 100 cards in hand or if I have 0 cards in hand. I think Riftbound is in kind of a unique spot with how the game works, where you can always play to the strengths of your hand, especially with these body decks. Is one of the things I've noted playing set is that like sometimes my strategy changes just based on my hands. Like if I'm very spell heavy, then I try and do more combat. If I'm very unit heavy, then I try and do less combat and just develop a big board and try and overwhelm my opponent that way. And I think this deck kind of exemplifies that. So the biggest thing with the deck is that you don't need like infinite card draw in order to make things work, but it has just enough, right? Between the disciplines just being pretty much always a +1. Like Discipline's a crazy card that definitely shouldn't exist. And then we both have the Lonely Poro as something that your opponent's going to have to kill, and that's going to draw you a card as soon as they do. And then also the Crab, like the 9 draw ones is pretty much enough, especially once you combine like the Crab with the Emperor's Dice. And then obviously the Seat of Power has just kind of been the consistent thing that we've seen out of these decks as a way to potentially get more card draw. Because like typically you don't need that much to get through. Do you think Mirrorless saw his Pike deck? Yeah, I mean, I trust Deval on his Pike list. Obviously, he was able to make the top, so Deval's a great player, so I would definitely use his list if you're looking to play Pike. But there's like 2 variations on it. Is if you like the mid-range style of Pike, then play Deval's list. If you like the controlling variation, then I would play Rossum's list, right? His list is a lot more controlling and it's going to be much better into like the Dianas of the world. And realistically, both of them end up losing the Yi anyways. So, um, yeah, that's just how it goes. So, um, when can we get Danny or Coco to stream? Well, the main thing with we're trying to like have some rotating guests is something that we want to start doing for. We might do them on Mondays just because it's a little bit more convenient, or we'll do them on Wednesdays. We're gonna have one that's just one of our streams that's gonna be kind of a me yapping is probably um, the relative term I'm using. Just kind of whatever I'm interested in. The other one will be more of a podcast style where we have guests on to talk about specific topics, right? So that's at least the current intention for how we're handling the streams right now. But it's something that we're still adapting to. The twice a week stream is just something that we wanted to build into, start doing a little bit more. So yeah, on a blue LeBlanc hook, I've got. I'm trying to make it anti-chaos by dropping the death note bonuses and the negative cell effects. Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what you end up doing with LeBlanc, and kind of my take on it is just that I think wherever you end up going with it, you're gonna end up giving up percentage points one way or another. It's just kind of the nature of card games is you can't ever make a deck that beats everything. And I think that's something that's been kind of a struggle for people coming from, video games with Riftbound, um, being like the card game that appeals to the widest audience and the Riot side of, all the 2xKO players coming over, um, and all that sort of stuff, and obviously League players as well. Um, it's just sometimes you just have that bad matchup, and there really isn't much that you can do. Where you just have to accept the bad matchup because it makes all of your other matchups so much better, at least in my opinion. So, but it's always worth experimenting with. That's never to say that there's no reason to give up, but at least from my personal experience, that's where I've been at with LeBlanc. And for me, obviously, as well, now that we're going into the final, where there's no more RQs, I'm not as interested in expanding on the decks that we currently have. I think the meta is pretty close to solved, as of right now. So, yeah, for better or worse, I think this is just kind of the meta that we have for the future RQs. So, um, yeah, for those who are interested in playing in the champion, I think they're called the championship series for metal best ofs. Here's your relative tier list. I feel like Ivern's one I should put even under the jail, but given how awful this deck is, but and it also is like kind of a worthless metal, so you know how it goes. Let's see. Should Starcross be banned? Probably. I think one thing that we've seen from Riftbound is that, and most games, is that we have some universal rules that I don't think that should be broken. And reaction speed removal spells, I think, are something I've been over or undercost at this point. I think Gust is also a card that's just a little bit too efficient when it comes to reaction speed buff spells. It just makes the game so much more difficult to play around and creates a lot of nonsense situations that were unintended as a part of the gameplay loop. So I think that reaction speed removal is something that we shouldn't see for a while, or if we do see it, it should have a much more steep cost than what we have had, so they can balance the game a little bit more around it. How is Lux combo versus E matchups in terms of win rate? It's very good for Lux. The only exception is if they're on the Triforce variations, then that matchup's really tough. If they do draw Triforce, then you're probably going to lose. But outside of that, it should be pretty good from my understanding. I'm assuming that these were... Not sure what happened. This is Vancouver. That's why. So didn't end up having the greatest win rate into it at the event, but at least from talking to Trevor, I know that a lot of it is, he was able to beat plenty of Yees in his testing. It really just comes down to if they have Triforces or not. Yeah, exactly. So long as people have fun with it at the end of the day, play whatever you want. I mean, there's an Ivern player who started 6-0, and I think Ivern's the worst deck in the game. So, like, it's anything is possible at the RQ level. And as we move into these cash events, I think that we will see a little bit more of a heavy lean towards some of these top decks, with the exception of maybe everybody going for the Ari side quest, since the Ari will be worth a lot more than pretty much anything else you can get. So you just want a deck that is good into these top decks, and I think in that retrospect, Kha'Zix actually has a pretty decent matchup spread against a lot of the top decks. Maybe not Azir so much, but you beat up on LeBlanc, Aurora, and apparently Diana, really, and Yi are all at least playable. So maybe this will do okay. My matchup into all these decks hasn't been too bad. Diana is my least favorite matchup for set, personally, just because that deck is some complete nonsense. I'm so tired of these Ride the Wind decks, but it's still all playable. Um, do I think Jace will be an Aurora machine? Not really sure. He obviously has a bunch of gear synergies, so I'm hopeful that they don't print some sort of extra gear synergy or like tutor. Well, I guess they don't do tutors in Riftbound, but some additional way in order to help find Auroras out of that deck. It's not something that I would look forward to, especially because it has access to cards like Progress Day and such. So it's possible that Jace will just be a gear merchant, and it's possibly there's something else cool that that deck can do. So I'm not too, one to speculate too much. I guess there are a couple of cards that I can talk about that got announced. I think it was just the Jace and the Mel, right? That were officially spoiled. Let me see if somebody has a link to the article that they did on that. XP, yeah, down here in not great tier. So, but yeah, that's my take on the current meta. What information can you extract from these stats when play level is so different? That's a good question. I use a lot of this to for this data. This is more to perform my or to do my own confirmation based on certain things, right? Like where I know that based on my testing, um, that some of this stuff makes sense, right? There are some exceptions where I think the Aurelia matchup for LeBlanc is a little bit higher than this. And we've kind of seen that from like Utrecht, even where it had one of the lowest win rates. It actually had a pretty decent Aurelia matchup, all things considered. Um, so, you know, it's not quite as bad as it looks on all these. So again, it's like small sample size, and as you mentioned, like the player skill in a lot of these is questionable. So I more so use this as somebody who's like trying to explain how this data works to everybody. Um, this is something that we just gotta take with a grain of salt. Actually, let me swap my monitors around so I can look at the camera a bit more. Um, but yeah, so that's my take on this is to take everything here with a grain of salt. Again, with a few exceptions. If something is like this low on the win rate, then you can probably just surmise that the matchup is pretty terrible. But even looking into other card games, there are some things that people just don't understand when it comes to a lot of this stuff. And you know, if you don't know how to play your deck into a specific matchup, then and it can be a struggle, then you're gonna have stuff like this happen to you all the time. So, um, yeah, just take everything with a grain of salt. Use the data as like more of a reference point than anything else. So, um, do I think yellow purple will be as powerful as people say? It's hard to say. Depends on what the leader does, but there are a lot of combinations of cards that color can theoretically play. Um, Blanc is winning into Aurelia IMO. I kind of agree. There are some variations of Aurelia where, like, if you wanted to build your Aurelia deck to beat LeBlanc and you just like max on Starcross and Fizzes, then sure you can do it. But um, yeah, from what we've seen out of Aurelia decks historically, that's not something that they typically do. So yeah, I don't really know what the deal with the Victor Aurelia matchup is. I think one thing that I know as somebody who's played it is there are variations of Aurelia that make Victor tough, or if they are just on like all the two drops plus disciplines, like that matchup can be horrible. But yeah, it's just I still think overall Victor should be pretty favored in Aurelia, but um, I can always change just based on the variations of Victor, right? Because like one thing that this data doesn't really tell you is when there are decks that have multiple variations of the same deck. Like Victor has like token strategies, they have varying numbers of singularities and um, stuff like that. Some are more combat focused, some are more spell heavy. I think it really makes the data a little bit tough to see. It's not like every deck or like a game like One Piece or whatever, right? Where every deck that uses a leader is more or less going to be about the same, right? 2x Gus, 3x Dark Australia beat you. Yeah, exactly. So some variation like that will probably beat up on LeBlanc if they really want to, but typically Aurelia decks can't do that because it'll make their matchup into pretty much everything else worse. So Unfortunately, Medify doesn't really have like a change log. It's something that we're talking to them about to maybe make it a little bit more apparent when it comes to all of that stuff. But I can always ping Daniel since he does all of our updates on this stuff. Um, and considering matchup knowledge or deck understanding, how do you those things affect winning? Um, I think when you're playing through an RQ, this is like one of the big advice things I always recommend for people whenever you're going into one of these tournaments is that you're going to play into so much random nonsense. No matter who I look up of the 2,000 people, there's not going to be two people whose tournament path looks identical, right? So this is why I always recommend that whatever you may do with your deck that you're playing, understand your matchups and understand your win conditions. Even when you have these very bad win percentages. You just want to understand what your deck's trying to do and hopefully be able to play around some of these even really bad matchups, like the Ezreal into Aurelia matchup and stuff like that. I can tell you that the true master of the deck do know all of the matchups, but we just don't have enough time to test into all 40 decks. So you should at least have a proper understanding of like what every deck here wants to do. The Teemo deck's going to play a bunch of hidden things and try and get the battlefield. So against those decks that are trying to hold battlefields, like Teemo, like Vex, you want to prevent them from ever getting in. You're probably going to be more on a hold strategy no matter what your deck is into the Vex and the Teemos of the world, because those are decks that don't have the ability to break in quite as easily, as opposed to something like Darius, which we know is a very aggressive deck. That color combination of Fury and Order, both of those are very aggressive colors, so you can just surmise that that deck's going to be very aggressive no matter what you know, and play accordingly, right? So you're still going to want to have some understanding and general understanding of what the color combinations you're playing against are, um, but you don't need to know about like the specific matchup into Rek'Sai versus Darius. Like when it comes to both of these decks, you don't need to test into them. They're going to do very similar things. They're going to play a bunch of aggressive units and try and kill you as quickly as possible with all of the cheap units while not having access to many cards in hand. Right? Maybe Rek'Sai will be slightly more spell heavy, whereas Darius will be more unit heavy. But beyond that, there's not much that you need to know, right? When we're talking about Kaisa versus Jin, like these decks are going to be very, very similar in what they do. They're going to be playing a bunch of spells to kill your stuff, right? So, um, yeah, that's my take on going through any events is to know your deck better, know what your general strategy is, right? Whenever I'm building one of my decks, going into my lists, right, I know that I'm going to want to be playing. A turn one play into a turn two play. Um, hey, this website sometimes. Um, you know, taking my set deck for example, I know that pretty much any opportunity that I have Arena Bar plus Rengar opener, that's probably going to be the line that I go for, right? It's just Arena Bar, Rengar something, and then immediately rebuff it and then play the game from there, right? I know that turn one, I'm going to play around my Cythrias, my Fey Folks, with ideally like a turn to Fiora or Arena Bar into playing the game from there, right? Like, I think it's much more impactful to know what your deck does, um, rather than just like trying to think about every potential matchup in the meta, right? So just know about the general cards that you fear. Like if your deck is my deck's a hold deck, so sometimes Vi can be a problem for me. So this is a card that I'm always keeping in mind whenever I play into order decks. Starcrossed obviously a strong card against me, so I'm more playing around the specific cards out of these decks rather than I am the deck itself. What do you think are the hardest matchups for set? That's a good question. I think Azir historically has been my worst matchup. Um, I'm curious. Obviously, not everyone plays my specific list of set. Um, so I'm curious what well, according to this, I guess this is pretty low sample size, but all the top decks are a bad matchup for set, which is very funny. Not as quite bad here. Let's see, losing win rate into Aurora. I think my answer is going to be Azir is the thing I'm the least happy to play into just because I've lost to it the most, personally. I don't know if it's necessarily a bad matchup, but it is one that I'm not really happy to see. So Diana has some problems as well, but yeah, overall, let's see if there's anything that's like an outlier. Um, yeah, not really. I would say Azir is probably Set's hardest matchup, if I had to guess. I haven't really mapped it out exactly, but at least just one from what I have experienced. I hate playing into Azir. That deck's pretty good at breaking, and they also have like decently sized bodies that they leave around, so I'm just a little bit too slow to handle them. But yeah, it's either Azir or Diana, probably. I think they just need to do some combination of adding around or removing buys from being as accessible as they are. Obviously, somebody going X11 and not topping in a 13 round event is unacceptable, right? So if they have to add an extra round to make things a little bit more fair, then so be it. But yeah, it's obviously unacceptable that someone can go X11 and not make top 8 because they just keep adding more people is tough. So alternatively, they can expand top cut. I don't think that it needs to be cut to top 8. Top 8 out of 2,000 people is kind of crazy, in my opinion. So you could go back to top 16, top 32s. I probably wouldn't want to see top 64s if we're just being completely honest. I think that might be a little too deep. But yeah. Do I think Draven will return to tier 1 if Vanquisher's unbanned? Probably. I think Draven's already a very good deck. It's only really held back by the Aurora matchup currently. So, but I always have Draven up here, kind of towards the top. In my personal opinion, I think that deck and color combination is very, very strong. So, that's actually the Faithful and big units. Yeah, it's just been my personal experience into it. Maybe I get unlucky into every time I play against Azir, but that's just my personal demon, I suppose. You prepare for sideboard. It's like 6 cards to counter certain domains broadly, and then 2 cards for specific matchups. Sure. You can talk about my specific sideboard that I use whenever, just because this is my unique list to me. But the way that I typically approach building a sideboard is your problem solving, right? You want your main deck to be as strong into the field as possible, but there are certain matchups you're just going to have dead cards, and you want to make sure that you're accounting for that. Hidden Blade and Repulse specifically are some of the cards that I know are going to be kind of bad into a lot of matchups. So I need to make sure, at least when I'm prepping into the field, that I have some sort of card that's kind of universally good out of the board that I can swap for those, which is where my Vi comes in. This is a card I'm never sad to have access to more Vi, so that's why this one here is out of the board. And then Lucian is kind of in here as like a going second, as I want to fix a lot of the problems that the deck has, and I know that because of me playing Valley of Idols, I want access to Lucian plus Valley of Idols, because this is one of the stronger things I can do, is just have the Lucian go in, immediately drop a unit there, and then Lucian come back out. So that's why we have access to the 3 Lucians in the sideboard, is specifically for the game where we're on Valley of Idols in order to make that play a little bit stronger for us. And then beyond that, it's just the specific stuff that I want to target. More repulses against the decks that's good against. Akshan for any sort of gear deck, and then Ash specifically for Aurora. So just because I think that's one of the more annoying matchups that I can sometimes struggle into. So, but not every deck's gonna build like this. I will say that in Riftbound, we've kind of seen this across the board from these decks that have reactive answers, that you kind of want a couple of universal cards, i.e. my Lucians and my Vi, and then a couple of more specific cards like the Ashes and the Auctions, just to show up your numbers and make sure that your list is good. We've seen Diana historically where they have like 4 cards that are copies of extra cards in the main deck to just change some numbers around because they have access to cards like acceptable losses in the spot where I have a Repulse and Hidden Blade, right? So that they can always board those cards against and everything. And then you still want your Silver Bullets, where there's some decks that are just going to fold to Auctions and Ashes. So having access to those cards is important. What do I take out for the Lucians? It's usually Citrias and Arena Bar. Take out two C3s and an Arena Bar. And I put in three Lucians. If Repulse is bad in the matchup into like IE or something like that, then I can take that out too. But Lucian game plan also doesn't typically work super well into Yi anyways. I still end up swapping it just because it is a stronger turn one play. And it can run over the crab when they play it. But yeah, that's one of the tough parts for sure. Extra test if your opponent chooses to go second when they're choosing. No, nobody chooses to go second when they're choosing. I think it's just never worth it. Why do I think Kaisa is so low tiered now? It's whenever you're playing a reactive deck in Riftbound, Kaisa is only ever good when her removal spells are good. So, you know, if you were to play into only Dianas, then Kaisa would be the best deck by far. But as the format is expanding and we're getting better answers and such, Kaisa was always a deck that was built on the idea of just never letting your opponent play the game by killing every unit they play. So when you're playing into decks that can counter that, i.e., Aurora decks she struggles with because their units are too big to kill. Aurelia has always been a problem for her because all of her shit has deflect and she has access to Infinite Guardian Angels. Master Yi is on Camel plus Punch First plus Zanya's, so you know you're never going to answer that. And then Azir is the token deck with all the gears. Like, what are we really doing with Kaisa in these matchups? So things are only relatively placed based on the decks that you're going to be playing into. And when you have bad matchups into pretty much 4 of the 5 top decks, right? We see a losing Aurelia matchup, a losing E matchup, apparently a decent LeBlanc matchup, a losing Azir matchup. It's gonna put you relatively low on the tier list. Yeah, exactly. That's one thing about Riftbound is going first is a little bit too strong right now, and hopefully something that they'll address in the future. Because even if you like miss a turn one play, it's basically like in set 2 when we had access to Obelisk of Power and everyone was playing Obelisk of Power, going second, except you also get to draw an additional card. So going first is just always broken, especially because of like how the point tempo works and stuff. Like you want to go first so that your opponent doesn't go first a lot of the times. So if they're just that much slower to actually get to the board. But yeah, so I'm gonna pull up. I can do some VOD reviews at this point. Maybe we can watch my finals game, see if that was interesting for people. From my POV, I haven't actually watched any of these back, so I can watch these back and kind of see. Oh god, the sound of my own voice. Yeah, we're gonna have to mute that one. But that might be some interesting content for people who are curious. I know a lot of people always ask about my set lists and how I specifically play it. So let's swap the things over here. Since I've kind of done my recap of where I think the format's at, I think it's pretty much solved. We'll see how the PPG ends up showing this weekend. I think is which will be the biggest of all these events. But yeah. So yeah, my tournament run was kind of interesting. I think the Draven matchup was probably the toughest one, and obviously being the only match that I lost, one that I wanted to approach and watch back. So can see if people end up having any questions while I go through this. Let's see. Go to 2x. Let's see, is this not actually showing things? Great. Sorry guys, for some reason VLC Media's players having a fit. Maybe I need to do this in Windows. Worst case, I can just do a screen capture, but okay. Much better. Okay. So, yeah, going into Draven, this is a matchup I know that historically was never my favorite. I think it maybe got a little bit better for us. Um, but yeah, here I ended up mulliganing to just mulligan the pit rookie. This might have been a mistake. I maybe was supposed to mulligan the first mate as well. Part of the reason why I did this is just gives me the option to have multiple turn one plays. Obviously, I ended up losing the die rolls on this because modified play draw for top eight. So I know that I'm going second here. Yeah, I can. Is this gonna? That's a little annoying that it pops up at the bar every time. Whenever I need a pause. But yeah, I know that this is kind of like our ideal. Oh right, I'm gonna just wait for like 2 minutes. Uh, turn one play, right? We know that Arena Bar and Rengar is like part of why we have both these cards in our deck. So um, it becomes one of the good options that whenever we have access to it. But this will work. Ooh. Okay, perfect. So can play through this. All right. So obviously I end up thinking here for a second. But I think it's always going to be better to just play the Arena Bar here. The only reason that this can kind of backfire is my opponent has access to the 4-drop Vex. But fortunately, he doesn't end up having it. So we get to go for our main line here. Discard. Basically always discard duplicates. Just something I always recommend, especially when it comes to utility pieces like this. Just something that you're going to want to keep in mind. Just kind of in general, you want access to as many different cards as possible rather than like discarding a challenge here or something like that, right? Um, so here he ends up going for like a very aggressive line to get the rebuke in. I'm usually pretty happy to see stuff like this. Anytime that your opponent is using their resources early like this, that's never really bad for you. So then up having to take a turn off, but it's fine. The deck's built to do stuff like that. I think this is like whenever people ask me why I like this deck so much and what I'll be playing in the future, this is like why I think it's going to be hard for me because I very much so enjoy these styles of decks that can just like take a turn off and not feel terrible doing so. And that's just something that I haven't seen as much out of other decks that have the ability to like hold and break and really play some honest Riftbound. Um, I think it's something I would love to see a little bit more out of. So I think for a while here, and it's possible that keeping this showstopper is better. Yeah, like I said, I go for the universal. I want to keep as many options as possible, and I figure at this point that maybe the energy saved will be more important um, than anything else. So it's possible that I was supposed to discard the first mate here, but yeah, or discard the showstopper because I think after thinking about how this hand played out, um, my hand would look a lot better with the first mate in it rather than the showstopper. But um, I'm never sad to have access to cards like showstopper. It makes breaking boards here a lot easier. Surprised so many guys still use TCG over Rift Atlas. Must be a Prevents thing. Yeah, this is what the tournament uh, is kind of used for the longest time. So that was a specific reason why I'm using it here, obviously. But I'm more of a fan of of Rift Atlas. The only issue that Rift Atlas has is it's a little bit more prone to crashing. But typically only crashes when you have like really complicated board states and has like a eventuality thing um, to eventually crash. So I think with how this turn ends up going, it takes a while, but doesn't end up actually doing any amount of combat. So um, we can fast forward through it a little bit. I think actually maybe he plays like another rebuke on my set. Yeah, so I think this is one of those spots where people ask me all the time, like what my answer is, and when I'm just like constantly getting rebuked. And I think the big thing to like capitalize on when you're playing decks like this, obviously end up having the Call to Glory here in order to trade for the Darius. Um, but it's primarily that you want to use your opponent's resources. We can see that though my opponent had the nuts draw with double Kaisa, they were able to rebuke and draw a card. We're running them pretty low on cards here, especially because as soon as they send the Darius in, right, we're able to trade it off. I mean, look at my opponent's board here, right? Like this is the ideal spot where we're able to take out both of these Kaisas. We have access to a challenge as well that can take out this Vex. We're going to leave them with 5 runes, 4 cards in hand, and only a Tide Turner as soon as we go through everything that we're are planning on doing here, right? And if they send the Tide Turner into the monastery, which I think he doesn't end up doing smartly, just because it would only put him on odd points, yeah, we would have left our opponent with literally nothing in here. So when you're playing this set deck, or decks in general, just understand that like your opponent will always have a cost associated with um, playing the game like this. So um, yeah, so here I figure the game is pretty much guaranteed over. The only thing that's awkward is there's not a efficient way for me to be able to break this right side. I think this is one of the spots where, had I kept the first mate instead of the showstopper here, um, I would get to blow him out. Although I guess I wouldn't be able to play the challenge, so maybe that wouldn't even be necessarily worth it. So maybe it did work out that I actually kept the way that I did. So um, pass focus slash sack button is worth it for that one. Yeah, I can agree with that. So unfortunately gets to draw a card here off of Draven ability, but again, that's still fine. We're starting to catch up on points, and I think at this point we can afford to just kind of clear our opponent's board and put them in a terrible spot, especially because our opponent's on 4 here. So we know that our opponent has to be able to clear both sides in order for them to be able to win this game, which is going to be very, very difficult on 7 runes. I think I end up thinking a little bit on whether I want to reinforce or not. Typically, this deck does operate in +3s, so maybe it was better to reinforce here. I just get a little bit worried sometimes committing too much into that, but I think it might have been better to reinforce here. It's really tough to say. The unfortunate part of this format was that it was not open deck list, so I didn't know exactly what was on my opponent's list. But sometimes, like if you're going through a Swiss tournament, that's something you just have to think about. So I think in hindsight, I think the issue I was maybe worried about was like if he had another rebuke plus another vex to get into this side over here, then I didn't really have any recourse. But thinking about it, it wouldn't really have mattered because I am able to hold to 6 here anyways, and that would have been the first 6. So um, yeah. So I think from here, this is all um, pretty easy. Nothing crazy that I necessarily need to do here. I do think it's important to back out here, just knowing that my opponent's able to have this 8 Might Draven. So if I were to try and do combat and hold with anything, then it also adds like value to cards out of my opponent's deck, like Cleave, that otherwise would not have any level of value. Plus, it being Draven, they're able to draw cards and such. So, um, plus, it's important to note that because my opponent's on 4 here, I know that they're going to 6 here, right? So no matter what they end up doing next turn, I have options. I can either go for the hold on one side, um, or I can, um, yeah, I can go for the hold on one side, or I can actually win the game, given access to both. Plus, I'll have access to being able to draw a bunch of cards off the monster and such. So, um, the only thing I was thinking about that I maybe should have done differently, knowing with how my hand is set up, is normally set is much better on offense. But because I could have played the Fiora, buffed it here, and then had access to Punch First plus Showstopper, it's possible that that was worth doing. Because then the Fiora can clear both sides pretty easily with the Repulse as backup, making that a pretty safe line. But I figured that if I really needed that, with how my hand is set up, I'd probably be okay. So either way, so um, kind of a general rule for everybody playing Riftbound and into any of these reactive decks and being in spots like this. One thing I'll always recommend is you want to be sending your might to be exactly equal to or bigger than your opponent's. Flinching first in Riftbound is like one of the things I think you never want to be putting yourself into a position to do. If you're the one that has to react to what's going on, then you're always going to be in a much tougher spot, right? So here I know that I'm sending what was this 9, 16, 18 into my opponent's 8 plus 8, 16. So yeah, it's one of those situations where my opponent has to act first. I get to draw my two cards here. Um, and I know that this will certainly be enough to win the game. I maybe should have sent the. Okay, yeah, it didn't end up mattering. So we were able to actually win game one. So I think game two was one where I just got trounced and there wasn't really anything I could do. Spoilers on this one, but it's tough to say. I found myself in this spot where normally into these decks I do want to like immediately develop a unit over here, but I saw with like how my hand is, it's so unit heavy. I don't really have any sort of recourse if my opponent just decides and they have access to the Vex. So I know that they could go for it, where if they just have like a rebuke on my Fiora that I could play over here, I'd be kind of in a tough spot. It's possible that I'm supposed to force the issue, just because it puts me in like a really bad spot as time goes on if I don't start scoring. And maybe I could have looked at my opponent's runes here and see that they wouldn't have been able to rebuke me in the first place, but they could still star cross me, and that'd be pretty sick. Um, Especially because I don't have access to um, exactly what I'm looking for here. So I think once I get to this point, this is maybe this is one of the more interesting spots. So I just send everything here. Again, putting myself in the spot where they have to flinch first. Obviously, they have a hidden card, so them flinching is a lot easier. Um, but I know that either they're pushing with the fan, in which case they'd push my biggest guy, and I'd be 5 over their 4. They'd still have to flip that. And then I have access to this Call to Glory and Vi. So me having two combat tricks, and me knowing it's most likely my opponent only has access to one, as 2 energy is their general breakpoint for the Draven deck, but it's like spinning axes and rebukes, but I know my opponent doesn't have access to rebuke because they only have one purple. So it makes things a little bit easier. So um, yeah, so I go for the Vi here. My opponent flips that. They play a spinning axe. And then I think I end up going for the buff on this. I don't know if there's a better way I could have done this. Let's see, because it was. I think this was one of the plays that I noted I maybe could have played a little differently afterwards. Because I think yeah, my opponent's 6 and I am. So they're 9 to my 9. So I think here I probably should have passed and then saved the Vi afterwards so that I could have stunned whatever the spinning axe was. I probably should have known that they're going to play the spinning axe regardless in order to try and win the combat. And if they just trade, then I'm probably pretty okay with that. I get to save the Lucian and then develop a unit. So I think this was a mistake that potentially costed me, because they ended up having 7, so they were able to kill the Vi. Um, they were able to kill the Vi plus Pit Rookie, as opposed to otherwise I would have been able to keep the Pit Rookie around. They would have only killed the Vi. I don't know if that would have made that much of a difference, to be honest, but I guess we'll see how much an extra Pit Rookie over the course of this game would have mattered. Oh, yeah, they had 8, so they would have been 6. So, oh yeah, it would have been. I would have had an extra first mate actually. So maybe that would have been the difference maker. Honestly, I was feeling like I was in a pretty good spot here once I got to this point, just because my opponent was pretty low on cards. Um, I don't even remember how I ended up losing this game. Clearly did something stupid to lose from this spot. Or I think maybe it's just the fact that I ran out of cards too. It's the only issue I have with this deck in the Valley of Idols line is that I just feel like I'm always running out of cards as opposed to the Grove and Monastery games where the battlefields are my typical ways to actually get cards. Okay, just ends up playing the Draven here. Yeah, and this was something that I noted that was very awkward that I didn't really have a great line here once he played the Draven because he's going to hold to make this Draven a 7 might. So it's possible I should have just played the set here and gone for the hold. But instead of the Fiora, I felt like the Fiora was a little bit stronger because the specific reason was that if I played the set and then he killed the set, then I would be back in the same spot in the next turn where because I would be spending 2 power to do that, I'd be going down to 5 and then going on 7 the next turn. Um, which would make it so that I can't double spell again, which is kind of what caused this to be an issue for me. So he ends up having a falling star, which is what made me wish I had um, done this differently. But now I'm just kind of in a very rough spot. I think maybe that's why I think from here I was supposed to retreat out this Lucian. Actually, now that I think about it, I was just so dead set on wanting to reinforce here in order to prevent the draw card. I didn't realize how the point tempo would end up working out, that he was able to hold this for free, and then I'd just be in a terrible spot. So maybe in hindsight, that's where this ends up becoming a problem. Um, yeah, and then this gets into a spot where he's able to hold the 6 for free, unfortunately, and then retreat out. So, and then, yeah, I just get forked here. Being behind on points. So I think the only thing I could have done differently here is I think if I had retreated this Lucian out, and maybe it was a winnable game state for me. And then holding on the Vi, I think, was something I should have done too. I should have known better to just trade off if my opponent's letting me, especially playing set. So the reasoning was that I wanted to prevent him from drawing a card. Is we were both just at a point where we're so low on cards. So I was like, I really want to prevent any sort of card to run over this. And I knew that like if you had access to another spinning axe, for example, I'd be in a really tough spot because I wouldn't be able to um, answer the overzealous fan, whereas otherwise I can just retreat out and develop. But I should have known that like with how bad my hand was, that this would be a problem to play like this. So I think this was just overall a mistake. But that was at least my reasoning. And then the way the game played out, obviously, I ended up getting destroyed at the end because I just had no way to get to the other side and ran out of cards pretty quickly. So um, then yeah, game 3, I like laughed to myself because my draw was just abhorrent. It was so bad. Um, so my mulligan was I think I messed up my sideboarding here too. I left in Lucians, but I think if I had those be Call to Glory and Punch First, I actually would have won this game, despite how it would have been a Call to Glory. Okay, that's good to know. But we'll see how bad my opening hand is. So this is my opener. I mulligan 2 into this hand, which is just, I don't even have a turn 2 play. My hand is so bad. Draw, sabotage. And my opponent obviously says nuts, draw second sabotage, and I'm just like, okay, well, this is certainly a game. So from this point, I had already like accepted my defeat. Like sometimes this deck just bricks out like this, and there's just nothing you can do, unfortunately. Um, so here at least I have actually a pretty good line because I have access to the Vi. Um, he pushes me out, but I get to respond and stump the Vi. Secondly, ends up being a tie, so it doesn't actually draw a card, and I'm able to actually develop while forcing extra resources. You know, he had to play Spinning Axe plus Buses, Overzealous Fan. Obviously, it sucks giving him a Grove draw, but that's just something that I had to accept in this spot. So, um, then I think here I realize I want to go for Arena Bar plus set. I think is just the best line. Um, yeah, and then going 7 to 7. My opponent is pretty low on cards. Granted, they will be able to draw off this Kaisa on the Rockfall path, but I don't think reinforcing here makes any level of sense um, with the first mate, because if he has any sort of answer for set, I just lose on the spot. So I think this is all fine. He ends up having cleave, which, you know, is what it is. Correct, yeah. It's considered a draw if both units are still there. It kind of makes sense because like there technically wasn't a winner of the combat. It's just that once there is no winner declared, the rules of the game state that you have to whoever the person you still have to have somebody stay at the battlefield, right? In order for it to make any level of sense for how the game works. So yeah, that's why it works that way. So even if it feels a little bit counterintuitive. So here I actually get to play these double sabos. Um, and I don't even think about it. I'm just like, you know what? Take this nonsense, get it out of my game, and we'll call it a day. Um, let's see what we end up doing here. Unfortunately, he still has a pretty large board with access to the spinning axe and such, so. But I do feel like this is like one of the theoretical spots that I can win from, so I start thinking a little bit harder about how to do that. I debate on like where I want my buffs. I think I end up putting it on the Kinko Monk. Makes the most sense to me. So this is the part that I kind of questioned. I knew with how his hand was that like this is a really difficult board to break, especially because I have access to this Call to Glory. So I expected a world in which the specific reason why I did this is I knew that if I hold this, I kind of just win the game on the spot. So I really just needed a whiff on a draw step. Obviously, I didn't get there um, because he was able to draw the stack deck. But I know that if he sends the 7 in over here, I can like Call the Glory, the Vi, spinning the Kinko Monk, and make life difficult for him. So I kind of committed to this line, um, basically no matter what. But I wanted the first mate there as well to give a little bit of extra insurance, should he draw into something crazy. So, um, all right, so I end up just accepting. I guess that makes sense. Um, Having some little level of prevention here is just makes sense. So I play the Call to Glory here to kind of force out a spell, at least in theory. He ends up trading the Draven. And I think I'm actually in a decent spot here, but he excels a Kaisa, which kind of sucks. Kaisa being his last card was kind of tough. I don't know if there's anything I could have done differently here. So maybe I was supposed to go for the line. If I call the Glory this Vi here, when he sends this in, what does that leave me with? So the Vi is a 9. His Draven is currently a 6, so I can get to a 9, but if he scores over this... Yeah, maybe I was supposed to call the Glory this Vi here. Maybe this was the game-losing mistake. I think that's always one of these tough spots with this deck and this game in general, is I just kind of accepted this. I think I got spooked when he played the stack deck, but I kind of went into this turn being like, I should probably just call the Glory my Vi. But as soon as he played the stack deck, I like got super spooked. But I think I was supposed to do that, and I would have made things a lot easier, for sure. But I knew that I was like, I mean, I guess if he had an answer, he probably would have just answered the Vi, right? But I was kind of worried about the Draven becomes a 9, so to my sets 7 over here without access to the Call to Glory, so. And then, yeah, he's able to set up a large hold. I think this ends up being a, yeah, able to kill almost everything here. Let's see, and end up retreating out with the first mate. That maybe also was a mistake. I could have, well, it didn't end up actually mattering with how the game ended up playing out. So he gets 2 cards here, draws his best card in Ferris Forerunner, which is a little frustrating, but what can you do? And at this point, I can either, so I have 2 options here where I can either put myself in a position where I go for the hold, and put him in a tough spot where he has to break. Or I could just score to 6, say, sack my first mate, give him access to an extra card. But he'll go to 7 if I do that, and that's a problem. So I go for the full hold here, knowing that he only has access to 3 cards, and unfortunately he has the 2 cards to win the game on the spot. So I think all of this was correct. Unfortunately, he just hit Rek'Sai plus Cleave, which I think was... I mean, he could have had like Rek'Sai plus Rebuke. It always had to be his Rek'Sai in order to make this line work. But yeah, so I think it mostly, this game too, was just this turn. I could have called the Glory of this Vi here and maybe made things a lot more difficult for him. So I don't really know what he would have done had I done that. I guess it becomes Draven plus Kaisa comes over the Grove side, but then I get to save the set, and I get to kill whichever is bigger. The Vi doesn't get to stun that side, though, so that becomes at least somewhat a problem when he goes for the large hold. But I could have killed the Kaisa to prevent a draw, which maybe would have been good enough. So that was a part of this, was having the Vi back in base is why I considered this, but yeah, I think this is something I always recommend for people who are trying to improve, is just find your spots that are different. And like, the important part that I try to emphasize for people is that in order to truly improve at Riftbound and card games in general, right, while we're trying to drive that as a factor, is that it's important to not just know what you could have done differently, but understand the specific reasons why I did that so I can prevent it in the future. That's why I mentioned, like, specifically here, when I had perfect information, I know the last card in my opponent's hand is an Evelyn, and I go into this turn where I knew that from my mentality, I'm like, okay, when I'm setting up this board in this potential hold, what am I going to do, right? And I know that, well, the answer is I'm going to bait the 7 to come in here because I know my opponent's going to want to send the 7 to trade for the Vi. I can then play the Call to Glory to buff this Vi. I think putting the first mate out there is maybe something a little dubious. I just felt like it was a little too obvious. If I have a 6 might unit here and my opponent has a 7 might unit on the board, like what does my opponent think, that I just have access to nothing? Like obviously I'm just gonna have some sort of card there. Um, but I think I was a little bit too shook to not move the first mate up there. But regardless, that's why I ended up making this line, and I put myself in this spot where I know that I wanted to play the Call to Glory on the Vi. Then my opponent played the best possible top deck because it just kind of spooked me. And as soon as that happened, I like kind of reevaluated, which I think is an important factor. Is it's important to reevaluate in situations like this, um, and not be too all in on thinking about like one specific avenue or one specific line. But I still know that from the spot, the only way that my opponent realistically has to clear is to axe the Draven, and if he does that into the Vi, then it's a 9. So I probably should have gone for that and just hope my opponent didn't hit the nuts off this stack deck. But essentially, I know for me, I put myself in this spot where I was like, I have perfect information. I just need to fade a draw step on anything relevant. So that was what my line was going into this spot, and then I spooked myself. So I think the thing that I need to improve from this game is to not let myself get spooked and stick with what my core game plan was, um, rather than like fearing for my life as soon as I see that stack deck. Right. I think it's important to not just identify that like, oh, this is a mistake. I should have played the Call to Glory here. Um, it's more important to understand, okay, why did I let this happen? Why did I make this mistake in the first place? Um, and yeah, that was, I think, realistically where it is even players like myself sometimes get scared in these spots, and it's like, well, I think the fear of losing to like one specific top deck is always in our mind, right? Where I know that like when I made this play, um, and this was the hold that I decided to go for, I was like, I knew that there was a real possibility of me losing from this spot, right? If I wanted to play something a little bit safer, excuse me, excuse me, I could go for a much slower line and just like start reinforcing on the Grove, putting some extra units here on the Grove and try and play the game that way. I would go behind in point tempo, but I would go up on cards and just making that as a line potentially work. But I know with how my hand is, I don't have a way to break across to this rockfall path, so it could be a little bit of a problem, especially because they have access to this Kaisa that's going to draw them some cards. So this was the line that I decided to go with, and I think I was close to making the right call, but I should have just called the Glory the Vi and committed rather than making the line that I specifically did. And I think it would have been better because I would have kept the set around. So basically, I'd be in a spot where there'd be a Vi here and a set in base. Which, I guess with how this line ended up working out, it would have been worse for me with this Kaisa draw off the top. Because then the Vi wouldn't be able to stun in base. So, I mean, maybe this line ended up being better than I thought. The stun actually came in pretty clutch here, because otherwise it would have just been an 11 coming in, which would have not been good. So, yeah. I think it mostly was just this game too, as well. I think I also got spooked here, where I was just like, well, I don't know that I just want to trade here with how my hand is currently set up and just trade 9 for 9. So I preempted with the Vi, but I know that like one of the core rules of Riftbound is just like if you can trade, then or you always want to be the second to act. You always want to be reacting to what your opponent was. But I felt kind of scared to put myself in the position where I would still only be on 1 point to my opponent's now 3 on the next turn. I would be able to like just play score and then play a Draven and base or just Draven and base, and felt like that would put me a little bit too far behind. But I should have known better than that and known that I was basically just trading a first mate and a pit rookie for all of this out of my opponent, and that should have been perfectly fine. So, yeah, play less scared, I think, is my big takeaway from this one. So, yeah. I do have a couple of other matchups. Let's see, we're already a couple hours in. We can do one more. Don't know which of these. Honestly, my tournament bracket was, I think it was like Diana, Diana. I think I played three Dianas, um, a Fiora, the Draven, obviously. What else was here? Let's see, we can go through. Yeah, so this was Fiora. This one wasn't super interesting. I think the matchup's just insane for me. I'm just a better Fiora deck, so, you know, what is Fiora gonna do to me? This one was a Yi matchup, which ended up running a little bit long. I think it was Yi where I lost the die roll, so that kind of sucked, but then into Aurelia. This matchup was super quick. I kind of trounced the guy. And yeah, Diana. And then I think it was three Dianas after that in a row. So I can pitch it to the chat. I'll do one more VOD review. Is there any games anyone specifically wants to see? I got Diana, Aurelia, and Yi. So the three top decks. If there's any in particular that people want to or have questions for when it comes to. It's in the same type, Call of Glory on the last turn on the Fiora keep you in the game. I don't think so. It wouldn't have mattered because my opponent had access to cleave. So he ends up running the Forerunner in here. If I had played the Call of Glory on the Fiora, he would have just ended up cleaving this and trading it anyways. See, I got one for Diana, one for Yi. So yeah, because his hand was specifically Rek'Sai Cleave, I think I was just dead no matter what here. So I just ended up doing the math from this spot, and I was like, well, if he has nothing here, then the Call the Glory will be enough, right? Because he can run enough to trade at least, right? Because the Rek'Sai would run over this, and then he would send 8 might into my 6, so the Call the Glory at least trades here. So, and then I have a Fiora that's able to run 4/3. So maybe that's enough. So that was my specific reasoning for it, but it maybe was better to play the Call to Glory when he sent that in. You're probably right, but I would have lost regardless. So, that's part of it. I think maybe actually what I was probably supposed to do was play the Call to Glory using the Fiora buff. So they would have had to cleave and trade for that, and then my Vi over here would still be buffed at the end of the day. Not that it would have mattered because I ended up drawing nothing, but I would have saved a Vi instead of saving a Fiora, which is obviously strictly better. And yeah, but it would not have mattered, unfortunately. So, what version of Draven do you prefer and why? I don't know. There's like a couple of different variations. We can do E, I suppose. Just because I do think this is one of the more interesting matchups, maybe. I don't remember too much that happened this match, too, so we can see if there's anything that happens. I think there's like there's the two different versions of E, one with Jhin and one without. I think the Jhinless versions are maybe a little bit stronger in my mind, but it's hard to say. So yeah, here we get to have the line. I think anytime that you're playing into these Yi decks, you have to find your moment to like get ahead on points while you're behind, right? So I think that was where I found myself in here. And this was kind of like a weird spot where I was like, I have access to a couple different options. I can either let him go to 4 and then just play double Feyfolk. Or I can play the set and start doing that. I figured that because um, he had, I have access to this Showstopper plus Feyfolk, that maybe, oh no, I do end up going for this line. Okay. I think I specifically do this just because I'm like, I can always play the set later, right? If I play the set is something that functionally has haste because I'm just going to play it directly to a battlefield. So I think this is probably right. I just want to have access to whatever he does. Essentially, I'm putting myself into the spot where I can set plus Feyfolk and really ruin his day. So I think it's possible that like my board is so strong here that I could have retreated out this Rengar as well. Because then I just get Primal Strength plus Charmed, which always sucks, but I really didn't want him to be able to come in and spin the buff on the Yi to draw a card, which I think he ended up forgetting about anyways, but so yeah, it ends up working out for me though. This is like one of the best ways that I answer the Yi deck, is thanks to Faithful Shenanigans. So I think a lot about. I think one of the things I'm thinking about is if I play the Showstopper, I can essentially cycle one of these Showstoppers if I wanted to. By it also scores me a point, but I guess I decide against it just because I want to be able to potentially do Showstopper Shenanigans in the future. So I guess I probably do this wrong, right? Because I could have played set. Oh no, then I guess if I did it the other way, then I would have a unit that's kind of stuck over there. So I guess my specific reasoning for doing it this way is I still want to go to 4 points and score so I don't fall too far behind on tempo. Um, and I just want to kill the Yi, so I think this makes sense. But we essentially Showstopper in here, just draw a card and I guess draw a card and score a point, which I think ends up being worth it. He sabos me, which is fine. Oh, I did end up making one mistake, I think, at some point. Oh, he goes for the charm Rengar thing. That's very cute. I think it was in this match I made a mistake where I left like a Kinko Monk on a battlefield. I think it was this game. I don't know if it ended up actually mattering though. And letting myself get Rengar. So let's see. I assume that this is a Zanya as always. I think I spin the buff because there's basically no reason not to. We kind of need access to something here. Knowing that this is Zanya's, he essentially gets to always keep this Rengar. That's a problem for us, right? So I think we play the Kinko, buff this. And then send in to pull in the Rengar, because I think we just have to. Where do we pull in the crab? So we go just the answer, force them to attack your battlefield. Yeah, pretty much. First mate doesn't trade set here. Oh, did I just mess up? Oh. I definitely was supposed to. I don't know why I didn't realize that. That's definitely my mistake. What is... Did I just brain fart on this one? I don't know how we both brain farted on that one. That's crazy. I could have done this a little bit differently had I realized that, because I just could have sent the Faithful in and then grabbed the Rengar and then played the Vi, which is probably what I should have done anyways, but... yeah, that was just a straight up brain fart. I did, for what it's worth, I did play this tournament hungover, so... That's a big oopsie from both of us. It's very funny. But there's a show that even pro players like us make mistakes sometimes. 'Cause I think Darisu is also a very good player. He was known in set one for being the baited hook guy, but yeah, that's just straight up a mistake from both of us. Um, huh. So how would this have played out differently? I think had I realized that probably what would happen. So I'd have to send the set in with the Faithful. Well, I guess I can't even do that because then I just lose, huh? 6, 8. Oh, I guess what I could have done, it would have been the literal exact same thing had I realized that, right? Because I just send the Faithful in and grab the crab in the back, because that's what I end up doing anyways. And then he becomes a 3 defending instead of a 5. Maybe that's what I thought I was doing. Literally just a brain fart. I just like messed up the order on this. Because my intention was always to grab this crab anyways, right? So I was just supposed to do it simultaneously. Never punished. So take on seals and set. I feel like more often than not I sit in low runes. The issue with seals is like this deck operates more. It's on seals like is losing cards in order to facilitate that. Could monk first. Yeah, I guess monk first would have worked too, but I really should have just moved in the faithful at the same time. I think I was committing or thinking too much about dragging in this Rengar, but I should have known that like I was never gonna make that play anyways, right? So yeah, it was just stupid on my part. Faithful Crab is your favorite play against Lee. Yeah, it's very, very good. Um, but yeah, I don't like seals just because I tend to operate more low on cards than I do low on power. So especially in the game threes. So I think this game I just get like stomped. It's not even worth mentioning. Um, yeah, end up going for this line because I know essentially my hand is like very, very awkward here. Essentially, anytime that you go into this game where they start a 2 miter and you don't have the Lucian to score on this other side, it just puts you so far behind. So I think it puts me into a spot where I just have to commit and hope for the best. And unfortunately, he has the Rengar. So I end up going a little bit ahead on points here, but I just don't have the resources to ever crack back. So um, honestly, this is one of the matchups I probably need a better answer into going second. I feel like my game one is typically strong enough into them with Faithfolks and stuff, but when they're on the arena's greatest game, I just feel like I'm so far behind on point tempo that I just don't get to play the game. So I always force myself into these spots. So yeah, this game two, I just get rocked. There's like literally nothing to even worth mentioning. I think here he just like problem strengths me. Yeah, and I just lose my whole board. Don't get to play the game. Um, but this game three ends up being a little bit more interesting, I think. I at least have my good curve. Could he have set into Rengar, the Via stunning kill, buff the arena bar, and then grab the Rengar and base with the Feyfolk in this game? I guess I could have. Why didn't I think about doing that? Um, I think the issue I was running into in this spot was that because my opponent was on 6 and I didn't have a way to get to the other side, that was the problem that I was trying to conquer. So I knew in my mind the reason why I made this line, the brain fart aside, making the correct play where the faithful came into the side. It lets me go to 5. My opponent here holds to 7. They're going to commit to this line where the Rengar is here. I'm assuming that this is Zonia's, obviously, because Zonia's is the only hidden card that they typically play. Theoretically, it could be a stun, but I kind of have an answer to that anyways. So I need a way not only to be able to conquer and hold this side, but I also need to be able to break into the right side as well. Otherwise, even if I break this Rengar and I kill it, it doesn't matter because this grab is going to score on the monastery on the next turn, and with how my hand is, I have no way to get back over there, right? So I had to accomplish both points here, which is why I knew that I needed a unit in base plus to be able to break the left side as much as possible. So part of the reason why I didn't even bother grabbing the Rengar here after I thought about it was because, well, it's Azania's, it's just going to end up going back to base. So I might as well just grab the crab, give him one less unit that potentially could be annoying. It's possible I probably shouldn't have even grabbed the crab now that I think about it. I was mostly just afraid of like, I don't know, some sort of weird combination of cards that could have oh, I guess Charm is like the one thing that gets me here if I don't kill the crab. So we kill the crab so that we get to play around Charm. Otherwise, he just charms the set out. Um, and then is able to conquer to 8, right? But now he doesn't have access to a unit, so we would need first mate plus Charm in order to do it, which is a lot more of an ask. And then this creates a situation where, yeah, I'm able to have a unit in base in order to conquer over this, thanks to the buy plus Call the Glory that we know that we have in our hands. So yeah, so um, yeah, so then this game I think ends up being a somewhat weird one where thanks to him I maybe should have thought about this a little bit more, and this could have been a spot where I should have gone with the set turn 2. But anytime I see this, I'm like a little bit too afraid of just getting charmed. So the reason why we always prioritize Fiora over set is something that we want to stick around forever. Um, whereas Fiora is something that we can kind of let die and not really care, and because it didn't cost us a power, so it doesn't ever really set us behind on resources, right? So. Um, Here I end up going for Sabo, and yeah, I remember this game was like more than half of the actual playtime, um, notably, given that this hand was very, very annoying to see. I went for the sabotage here because I was like, well, I know how my hand is set up. Unfortunately, I've drawn double arena bar, and I think I even boarded one out, so I got pretty unlucky with my draws here. So I knew that I was in a good enough spot. Um, had I be able to like just showstopper in the set and then grab in the Fiora. And I just want to take whatever you would use to actually break the board after that. So let's see. So I end up having to go for a double sabotage line, and then I end up trading the Fey Folk for his Fiora. I think this is the only line that really makes sense because when I do this, it leaves him with Rengar, Alpha Strike, and Defy, none of which are able to clear this Fiora, and that can get me to start drawing cards again as soon as I get rid of the punch first, right? So I can, in theory, start drawing cards off of this Grove, assuming he whiffs one draw step. Um, and I did just take double punch first, so, ideally he's not top deck on me. So the line ends up working, which is good. Let's see what I end up playing here. Then I end up playing a set in base and retreating out. Interesting. Don't know if I was supposed to. Why did I? Oh, I retreated out because I knew that he had access to the Alpha Strike in hand. I think I should have just played this set on the Grove though. That would have been a lot better here. Yeah. I definitely should have just played the set on the Grove. I don't know why I didn't do that. That would have been much stronger. I think that puts me in tough water because of that. Why didn't I do that? I think, yeah, for some reason I was thinking that like the Alpha Strike plus the Alpha Strike would have killed the set completely without killing the Rengar or something. Hmm. But that was a very, very clear mistake. Um, and then I think I get in some deep water here. So I think about it for a little while and I think get blown out by a top deck his third punch first. Um, yeah, he top decked the third punch first, which was obviously very annoying. I was trying to play around this Alpha Strike out of his hands. Um, but yeah, did not end up getting there. So he ends up scoring to 4 here. Um, then I realized that I can't even go in with the Fiora because he'll just Alpha Strike it. Um, and I can't save it with set, so I just have to pass back. At what point should you change Legend Such decks? I was playing ladder and I've lost you past 8. Maybe at that point. The whatever depends what deck are you playing. I think a lot of it's like trying to figure out why you're losing. That's why I play games like this so that I can do my VOD reviews and figure out the little mistakes I made. Where I think this is one where I just need to take some extra time to think, and I definitely should have held with my sit on the Grove. I do not know what I was thinking here. It was a very big mistake. So the spot ends up looking kind of doomed, but I make this line that I think is pretty good because it plays around Alpha Strike. It guarantees me to kill this Yi even with the Alpha Strike that I know he has in hand. Um, what's up, Cat? Um, yeah, so ends up Alpha Striking to trade for the set, I believe. Yeah. And then now he gets to trade the. I think he ends up actually having On Guard as his last card here. So he plays the On Guard to deny the Conquer. Is that what happens here? But I knew that I sent in this way, so that I actually played around both On Guard and Discipline, plus the Alpha Strike that I knew that he had in hand. This is the only way to do that. So, yeah, then he On Guards me. Oh, yeah. I guess had he done it in the other order, I would have had to play the Rengar. I think he ended up making a comment after the game that he messed up and he should have gone On Guard and then Alpha Strike. Then I would have been in trouble. But fortunately, he didn't end up doing that. So I guess to redevelop here. And then he goes for this line where he conquers over the Emperor's Dice. And then from here, I end up having double Rengar, which is enough to win this game, fortunately. I was playing Draven like the Ride the Wind Jhin builds, like Spunko's list that you checked. Yeah, I can look at that. Was he the best of Draven? I'm curious. It's because I do think Draven has a couple of variations, all of which are interesting in their own regards. I think Draven is like one of the most underrepresented or under-respected decks. So, yeah, but from here he ends up just kind of losing to the double Rengar. So, yeah, but I think I, in theory, would have lost to this On Guard here. I don't know if yeah, because what can I do if he had On Guarded? I guess, yeah, because the On Guard's Alpha Strikes. I see. Then I would play the Rengar in order to win the combats. The Fiora would still be saved in base, and then I would top deck the Rengar. Okay, so even if he had played it correctly, I still would have won this game. I think that was something I remember commenting over because I ended up drawing this room right here. Also, I would have been able to hold this side anyways, so that's good to know. At least that his mistake didn't really end up changing the outcome of the game. Really was just like the one brain fart earlier in the game for this match, so. But this is typically how these games against Yi end up going, is you just have to abuse Feyfolk early and often. Feyfolk is like the main card into this. Let me go back to, but yeah, let me go back to my browser, and I can take a look at some of those Draven lists. Okay. And then answer a few questions, and then call it from there. Since I've been streaming for a couple hours. So you mentioned Draven from Utrecht. So Draven actually did pretty poorly in Hartford, which is surprising. Looks like this guy was on the Ride the Wind Jin stuff as well. Rex size, Ride the Wind, Spinning Axe, Stack Deck, Starcrossed. Even had the one Blighted Battle Axe. I think this card's cute. I don't know how good it is. Notably, no Ferris Forerunner in the main and just two in the board. I don't think I agree with this. This was something that originally early on we were like commenting a bunch on, that Ferris Forerunner is something that we're gonna have to start taking out because of how bad it is against LeBlanc. But that was before I just kind of remembered that Draven can be a Zon slop deck. We call them Zon slop decks because you can afford to play all these random one-ofs that just don't really do things in a lot of matchups, like these one-of rebukes, hard bargains, fizz, blighted battle axe. You can afford to play those because your game one is Zon Warrens, and then post board you can take these cards out into the matchups that they're not for, right? When your falling stars are bad into like Aurora, for example, then you can sideboard them out for stuff. When your blighted battle axe is bad, you can sideboard that out for your whatever it is that you need. So I think Ferris Forerunner is a card that I feel like is just so good into everything that you kind of need it. Obviously, it's like kind of bad into Starcross decks and stuff, but I think that's just kind of the nature of these things, especially when you're playing Jin. Like one of your better lines is to play the Jin. You can move it, you can ride the wind it, you can move it back to base, and then you still have all the energy to be able to play Ferris Forerunner, right? When you go turn 2 Jin into turn 3. Ride the Wind plus Ferris Forerunner. That seems like a pretty nutty curve. So, let's see what the Utrecht best of list was. That was just the cards that were spoiled here. Did want to comment on the mail that I think got announced, but it's all right. So you mentioned Utrecht. Glorious. So this list, yeah, this list is a little bit more up my alley. The only card that I don't like here is Switcheroo. I think this is a little bit too narrow for us. And with how I like to play these decks, I think if you're on the Jin plan, you should just be on the Jin plan. So I could see moving these Switcheroos potentially over to the board, and then giving us access to, probably would want the third Jin over the Vex. I think I want Starcross is the one thing that we're not playing here, is I would want some sort of mixture, because we're on Tide Turner plus Treasure Hunter, so I would turn these into Evelynns. One of the things that I really like out of this list is that we have access to Starcross plus Evelynn, so you can play your Evelynn early on turn 2 when you need to, and then later in the game you're able to like Starcross it back and then hide it, which you can also do with the Tide Turner as well. So Starcross actually works pretty well with this deck because of our choice of 2-drops, right? So I think this list doesn't get to play Rek'Sai is its biggest downside, which Rek'Sai does work pretty well with Ferris Forerunner when you need access to a little bit of extra clearing potential. So I think for me, I'm out on the Flash. I'm probably out on the Hard Bargain. I'm out on the Fizz. I mean, maybe I guess Fizz isn't too bad with Jin as just like another power sink. Um, but I don't like the flashes and hard bargains. Um, I think I would turn these into Ferris Forerunners and maybe some sort of spell. Cleaves are also something that we don't necessarily need. Over here, we're playing, I guess, more rebukes. So yeah, I'm probably wanting to lower cleaves, lowering flashes, lowering hard bargains, and turning those into Fort Ferris Forerunners plus Starcross. And then he was on Poros. I don't know if I agree with that. No overzealous fan is kind of crazy. But yeah, that's my specific take on this. Um, Spray fountains or eager apprentice. I think the spray fountains were a little bit better of a cook. Let me see if we have the Rift decks lists here. I don't know how much further back I need to go to actually get to Hartford. Should be around here somewhere. Surely. There we go. I saw it. 1953 players. Okay. So I actually had 3 Dianas make top cut. So I think this is an important skill for people as well that are looking to play a deck, is to like understand the differences with a lot of these decks as well. So one thing to note whenever you're playing this is some cards are very synergistic with each other whenever they're making these lists, right? So we have a much more traditional list of Diana, which is the one that ended up losing in top 8. Was this one that's, I mean, this is just as stock of Diana as it really gets, right? I don't think there's a spicy card in here, which is fine. I think the one Sprite Fountain is like our only spicy card, and then yeah, we're on 1 acceptable losses instead of the normal 2. Then we have the one of Eager Apprentice out of this list, which I think is an odd choice, but one that I suppose kind of makes sense. This deck is one that can run a little bit low on energy, and they want to be able to like cast Reduced, Starcross, Moonfalls, Eclipse, Ride the Winds, Hard Bargains, potentially even Flash. I think it's I think the Eager Apprentice is an overcook, personally. I would rather that be most of other things. So when asked between the two, I think that this Diana version is a little bit better. I think that this list is going to be better into pretty much everything but Yi. I think that the Sprite Fountains are a little bit of an overcook into Yi specifically, though. I do think this card is very, very broken, though. It just allows you to keep up on point tempo and have units that you just don't care if they end up dying or not, right? So, but you need, if you're playing the Sprite Fountains, then you're also playing the Arena's Greatest, and this is like your main game plan here in order to win the game quickly. So that I liked. Which last week made for the U-Trick list, best ofs, they like Spugness list. Yeah, I mean, I think for my list that I personally would make, I would cut these, probably like these 4-ish cards, find some room for Starcross and Ferris Forerunners and call it a day. And then I would turn the Pouties into overzealous fans, I think. I don't think that Pouties are really necessary into the majority of the field. But I do think Starcross is quite good. And I mean, you could maybe even keep the 1 Fizz, and you could cut like, I would be like cut 2 Flash, cut a Hard Bargain, cut a Cleaver 2. This Battle Axe is maybe too cute. I do see that we're only on 2 Kaises here, so maybe up the Kaisa count. And then we're going to maybe move the Vexes to the boards, because now we have 2 extra sideboard slots here. And yeah, that's, so I think that Soda King's list is a little bit closer. I think we just have a little bit too much nonsense. Like, Flash is cute sometimes, and there are some matchups where Flash is good, but I think it's overall like when you're again going through these tournaments, one thing I like to emphasize is like stick to what your game plan is. And Draven's game plan is winning combat with efficient units and efficient spells. And like we playing a card that runs away from combat can be nice because it can force your opponent to spend like a bunch of spells and then you flash them out. The issue with flash is like into some of the best decks being Yi and um, Aurelia, you'll note that our deck actually is pretty defy light. The only cards that they can defy is like our star deck or star cross, and that's really about it. But when you have flash, it's like almost you put yourself into these positions where you need the flash to resolve in order for you to have a chance. Let alone the fact that holding up two energy sometimes can be really difficult. So um, I think that there's maybe some merit for like one flash. It does come up sometimes, but I think two flash is a little bit of an overcook compared to like the alternative is we just play Ferris Forerunner and then we play a Ferris Forerunner to the base. Our opponent still has to commit resources to kill it, but then the thing just dies and we get the same amount of might and base anyways, right? So instead of having access to flash, it's like accomplishing a similar thing, but a little bit better in my mind. So, are you planning to upgrade the set guide again? Yeah, I'm planning on trying to get through to update the set guide here in this week, ideally before the PPG. I was gonna play Draven. I did play Draven in set two because I thought the deck was broken. I don't think I can play it right now because its Aurora matchup is too abysmal, and my tournament run um, into most of these events ends up having a few Aurora matchups. So that's the only thing that's keeping Draven from being one of, if not the best deck, in my opinion. I think if Aurora didn't exist or it got banned with nothing else getting banned, Draven might actually be S tier. Do you ever use the card stats tab and Rigsec to see if there's an hidden tech around? It's not something that I've ever looked at, to be honest. Um, most played movers and shakers, maybe. No, this is all financial stuff. Most played. Oh, this is all pricing. Yeah, I don't know too much about any of this sort of stuff. I tend to not really put too much emphasis on a lot of these random stats. There's too much information that's out of context when it comes to stuff like that. So, um, cut the bullshit and play more good cards. Yes, that is always my opinion when it comes to these, especially when going through like an RQ. I can promise you that anytime that somebody has like some of these bullshit, like a one of hard bargain, they played against like the Lux Infinite deck at Limicals, and they're like, well, let me just put one of these in to shore up that matchup, and then they're like, oh, well, I need more falling stars in like one specific matchup. So let's just put in a fizz and we'll make that work. And they're like, oh, well, kind of need to rebuke for the Aurora matchups to prevent them from even getting to the battlefield in the first place on top of my star cost. So let's just put one of those in there, the Aurora matchups. And then the Blighted Battle Axe is really good into some of the mid range decks because it just lets me ride a Jin infinitely in between both battlefields. So let's just put one of those back in there. And it's just like, when you do that, you lose out on so much of what makes this deck powerful, in my opinion. And like, I think it's better to just stick with what is good about your deck, especially when you're playing a deck that's as powerful as Draven into the vast majority of things, right? And when you do this, you end up losing out on some of the other things that makes this deck nonsense, which like having main deck Ferris Forerunner. As it's just a unit, I can just throw a Forerunner out there and say, what are you going to do about it? Um, and yeah, that's the answer is normally not a whole lot. You go to the Legends tab and where it shows you deck list, the tab for card stats. Um, Here. If I click on Master Yi, oh, card stats. Okay. So it tells you what like your core is of any sort of list. That's interesting. Gotta wait till Riftlight has a larger player base till we can get a decent data and even then take it with a grain of salt. Yeah, I mean we can use some like I'll do E who shall never be named for a second here. just because this is one that came up. And for those who are in the know, I am doing a One Piece side quest and giving that game a shot. Um, let's see if I can. Will this work? The media link. There we go. So let's take. So this is what the current One Piece information is. I'm just going to use this as a reference point. I know that we don't play One Piece, but I think it's an important thing to note with how a lot of this data ends up being that some of this can be a little bit off. For example, one of the things that I've been told, at least I'm still learning this game, but like if you just go based on the data here, Purple and L has like a bad matchup into Teach, which I've been told like when you play it perfectly and playing it myself, it's probably closer to 50-50. It's not actually as bad as the data suggests, but you have to understand like why that is, and it's probably because you have to play this matchup in a very specific uh, way that is a little bit counterintuitive. So I always take these numbers with a grain of salt, even when we have thousands of games under our belt to understand it. You have to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to card games. So yeah, and again, even when some of these decks have like some tier 1 to tier 0 status, we see win rates that are always closer to 52%, as opposed to here, we see much higher win rates in Riftbound. Do I think that like the Master Yi decks are and Diana are like way too good, even LeBlanc, according to win percentage, way too good? Kind of, but I do think that a lot of it does end up becoming a player skill diff. And because in Riftbound, part of these numbers is that we're playing a bunch of bad decks, right? When you go into the play percentage of a game like One Piece, um, you're only seeing these top decks that have a chance to win. Everything else, even like these decks down here at the bottom, are probably um, microscopic in terms of play rate, as opposed to these top four decks are probably going to be 70 to 80% of the meta that you're going to see at any real event. Like these top five decks are probably, yeah, like literally 70 to 80% of the meta. Whereas the top five decks here are maybe 30% of the meta because we have best of pricing. And because of that, the best decks are going to have a much higher win percentage than you would see in other games because they're going to always beat up on these bad decks, you know? I'll scroll over here to like these are the least played decks, and you'll see that it is a sea of green. There's literally nothing but green over here because the best decks are just going to beat up on the bad decks. The reason why these decks over here are bad is because they have bad matchups into the top decks. Um, so yeah, you have to take everything a little bit with a grain of salt when it comes to all the stats here, and this is why I emphasize that the data here is good to analyze and support some specific arguments, but it's never just as plain and simple as, oh, Master Yi has a 56% win rate in Riftbound, whereas the highest win percent deck in One Piece is 53%, which apparently is this ace deck. Um, so, like, clearly Master Yi and Diana and LeBlanc, all these decks have to get banned. And it's like, well, not necessarily. Uh, it just so happens that these decks all beat up on the bad decks, and there are more people playing bad decks in Riftbound. So, um, but yeah, so Fringe Gems. Interesting. Okay, well, I can tell you that the gems here are very much so not gems because these cards are all absolutely terrible. So would not recommend any of these. I mean, I guess the most playable is maybe Doran's Blade, but even then I don't think that card's particularly good. So I don't. Whenever I see stuff like this, I uh, I don't really take much note into these random stats from these random sites. I always like seeing random lists so that I can understand what people are playing. And sometimes I can tell you that like even the LeBlanc hook list I saw and built my deck based on, that's become the variation that we all play LeBlanc of. That wasn't played in China, right? But I did take somebody's initial list that looked really bad, and I was like, okay, well, this is worth trying. And then as we tested it, it performed particularly well into literally everything but Diana. So we're like, well, there's some legs, there's some merit to this strategy. Let's go with it, and that's how I figured out. So I always like to, you know, take the inspiration from people, but sometimes there's just cards that you don't think about. Sometimes you don't think about Sprite Fighting Spawn out of Diana, right? Until you try it, and then you realize it's good. So I think everything's worth trying, but you just have to take it with a grain of salt and stuff. So Yeah, I'll go through some last questions here and then end up calling it because it's getting late and I'll grab some dinner before bed. Soda goes to your local supplier. Oh, I'm also in Florida. I'm over in Tampa, so I wonder if he's where he's at specifically. But I mean, again, to get the best of, you have to be pretty good at this game at least to some degree, with one exception. But we won't talk about the one exception since that one's a little bit of a rumor and not not confirmed. Thanks for the advice. Always appreciate it. Yeah. Like I said, I think if you're not running, you should be winning most of your matchups that don't run into Aurora. That's as far as I can tell. Obviously, the stats will lie here a little bit, but having there are very few decks. Even some of the top decks cannot boast a win rate like this in the top five most represented decks, right? Being pretty much even with Diana, Aurelia, and then get into Yi, LeBlanc, Victor. And I think the Diana matchup you can even insure up a little bit more, add a third falling star, um, have some Starcross and stuff in there, and that matchup will probably be just fine for you, right? But even when you look at like these other decks, like Master Yi, best deck in the game, has a losing win rate, and LeBlanc, which our Draven deck does not, right? Diana, second best deck in the game, has like a kind of bad Yi matchup, has like a medium Aurelia matchup, has a bad Victor matchup, second best deck in the game, or better than that in terms of matchup spread with Draven. It literally just is. I mean, this guy they had like a losing matchup into his ear, but it's the Aurora decks, right? So I think Starcross helps a lot in that, and that's part of the reason why I would want Starcross is like when you're one thing I like to emphasize is that when your deck is so winning, then you can afford to have a couple of cards like Starcross that are specifically only for Aurora. Like if Aurora didn't exist, I would probably be more on the side of Rebukes. But we want Starcross to be able to bounce the Elder Dragon immediately with the trigger on the stack and stuff. So yeah. How do you side quest a card game that's already established? Seems like a huge knowledge burden. I don't know. We're gonna find out. I've never done it before, so it's more of the events are pretty cheap to get into. They're like $30 events. They're like a 1 weekend thing. I fly out and play in it and see how it goes. So either my card game knowledge will carry me and I'll be able to do well enough in that game, or the fact that it's a best of one game, or that I'm not experienced in it enough will cause me to crash and burn. So we'll just have to see. Palm Beach. Okay, I'm not too far away from there in Tampa. No comments on leaks until I get, and even when spoiler season ends up happening, as we have like all this going, I can tell you outside of like my specific spoiler that I have here on the 13th, like I'm not really going to be giving too much of a comment on all this stuff until uh, this day, because I think every card that exists will only really matter in the context of what the new format is, right? So there's some cards that like look kind of bad to me, like the Mel, for example, that I think got officially spoiled. Looks kind of bad to me, but maybe if like Mel's signature spell is broken and works very well with all this spells matter stuff, then that deck will actually be pretty good. So it's all this stuff only really matters in the context of what exists. Like people are asking about Jace, as he seems to be the blue orange legends, given that he has a new legend that or champion that got spoiled, right? But I can't really give any comments until I see what else is in the set, like if there's support for the old Jace to put in a gear or something like that. So, and then even if that does end up becoming the play, if people are still playing Diana and they're all main decking two acceptable losses and stuff, then well, it's gonna be difficult to play your gear based Aurora deck, right, or what have you. So, um, yeah. I'm glad I was at least able to take this photo, the 5 timer. Uh, but yeah, juxtapose this guy's face versus mine. Very funny. But cool. I appreciate everyone coming out. We'll be streaming again. I think we might be changing the time up for tomorrow to be the same time as now. Just because it's been kind of hard to get guests on the Wednesday stream for all the people that have jobs, unlike myself. So, um, last question I see. Any thoughts on Kha'Zix? Similar to Draven, even more of a metal card chaser? I don't think it's quite as good as Draven in that case. but it does have like a pretty good matchup spread. I think Kha'Zix's biggest issue is he's kind of anti-meta. Um, from what I've seen, I don't know how he had a that's nonsense. Kha'Zix's matchup into LeBlanc is actually pretty good. As you can, I think this is a better spread for what actually matters. You have a slightly losing Yi matchup, but like a pretty acceptable Diana, Aurelia, and LeBlanc matchup. Kha'Zix's real issue is that he kind of folds to some of these like random decks, like 0% to Ezreal, 20% to Rengar. That's probably accurate. And then some of these like hyper aggressive decks, like the Darius's um, and the Rek'Sais and stuff, can really give Kha'Zix some trouble. So, but I think Kha'Zix is a fine deck. It's good against all the best decks. So, um, you know, not many decks that can say that. So cool. Well, I appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Make sure to subscribe and follow us if you haven't already. I will, for all those who are asking, I'll try to get the set guide updated as soon as I can, and we will see everybody again on Wednesday. So, thanks everyone for tuning in.